Good afternoon, everyone. This is my pleasure to join you today to talk about two of the most recent changes in quality management standards, the ISO 9001-2015 and ISO 1345-2016. Within the next 45 minutes or so, we will go through an overview of the main evolutions of these two standards. First, let me introduce myself. I am Florian Torcé-Bonfillot, Technical Department Director at LNEG Med North America. I've also been a lead auditor for the past 10 years, auditing many quality systems according to both ISO 9001 and ISO 1345. The agenda for this webinar is the following. I will first cover the ISO 9001, presenting its structure, the main evolution, and the transition planning. We will then do the same going through ISO 1345-2016. And then we will discuss briefly if we can combine these two new revisions of standards. So let's discover what is behind the 2015 revision of the ISO 9001 standard. The first big modification is its structure. The standard now follows what we call the high-level structure. This structure is a universal one presenting 10 articles and joint requirements. It is defined this way to allow integration with other management system standards. Today, ISO 14001 and 17001 have already been published following this structure, and more standards under revision will follow. Here we can see that the structure is based on the Deming cycle: plan, do, check, act. Written in bold are the sections with common requirements than other HLS standards. Only the section 8 has several additions to cover specificities of ISO 9001. Now that we looked at the standard structure, let's talk about the main modifications. The scope of the standard remains unchanged. It is still applicable where an organization needs to demonstrate its ability to constantly provide products and services that meet customer and applicable statutory and regulatory requirements and aims to enhance customer satisfaction. Let's now have a look at the quality management principles. The quality management principles have evolved even though it is not a major modification. They go from 8 to 7, and we can see new terminologies such as leadership, evidence-based decision, and interested parties. Talking terminology, this is the subject of the next slide in which we will see the main changes. In the new standard revision, we identified 8 new definitions, as well as some existing ones that are being modified. For example, we have the interested parties, which already existed in the ISO 9004, but was not used in ISO 9001. Now, let's have a look into the requirements themselves. Here, we have highlighted the main new and reinforced requirements for each section. Going through them all would take few hours. However, we can identify that there are many modifications in the sections 4 to 8. Many reinforcements, but also a reduction of the mandatory documentation. Section 9 and 10 are also impacted, but not in the same extent. Of course, this highlight of the modifications are only a brief summary. If you want to know more, I invite you to join us during one of our training sessions. Although published in 2015, there is a defined transition period for companies to implement the new revision of the standard. The transition timeframe presented here is the one proposed by Eleni GMED. As for today, we are performing transition audits per the customer requests. In June 2017, all initial audits will be conducted according to the new standards, and renewal audits will be transition audits. As from May 2018, all audits will be conducted according to the 2015 revision. And at the end of September 2018, all ISO 9001-2008 certificate will expire. Now that we went through ISO 9001, let's focus on the evolution of ISO 1345 of 2016. You will see that the title of the standard, Medical Devices, Quality Management System, Requirements for Regulatory Purposes, is more than ever verified in the modifications that were made. So for this standard, we will go through the main evolution and then the transition planning. At the end, we will briefly talk about combining both ISO 9001-2015 and ISO 1345 of 2016. First, what is the type of company that can implement this standard? The new standard clearly specifies that this new revision can be used by organizations involved in one or more stages of the medical device lifecycle, and by suppliers or external parties who provide products to such organizations. The 2003 version of the standard is already implemented by subcontractors such as sterilization providers. However, the new revision opens the range of users. For example, a company that would perform calibration specifically for medical device manufacturers could implement it. The standard user should read the section 0.2, section that not many people are reading today. Indeed, we can find there clear explanations on the terms and concepts used in the standard, and more specifically in section 4 to 8. For example, we can find quite often the wording as appropriate. The principle to be applied is that the specific requirement is deemed appropriate unless the organization can justify otherwise. A requirement is deemed appropriate when its objective is to have the product conform to a requirement, to guarantee compliance with applicable regulatory requirements, or when this requirement allows the organization to implement a corrective action or manage risks. When the word risk is written, we are talking about risk linked to safety or performance requirement of the medical device, or linked to meeting applicable regulatory requirements. Please note that this definition is different from the one found in ISO 9001-2015. We can also see that when it is requested for a requirement to be documented, it must be established, implemented, and maintained. And where a regulatory requirement is mentioned, it encompasses requirements contained in any law applicable to the user of this international standard. It is limited to requirements for the quality management system and the safety or performance of the medical device. Two items have been added to the elements to be taken into account to create and implement a quality management system. First, the organization environment and its evolution, and second, the regulatory requirements applicable to the organization activity. What here is called organization environment could be comparable to the organization context as defined in ISO 9000 of 2015. This means a combination of internal and external issues, positive or negative factors, that could impact the organization's strategy with regards to determining and implementing its objectives. We often find this concept defined by market environment or organization ecosystem. The standard expects that the organization identifies its role under applicable regulatory requirements, such as manufacturer, authorized representative, importer, and/or distributor, and also the regulatory requirements that applies to its activities under these roles. And then it expects that the organization incorporates these applicable regulatory requirements within its quality management system. To match with the extension of company categories that can now use this standard as reference of its QMS, it will be possible, based on the organization activities, to declare as non-applicable some requirements from Section 7, Production, as it is already the case, but also from Section 6, Resources Management, and 8, Measurement, Analysis, and Improvement. To conclude with the elements that help understand and properly use the standard, we can identify that the definition section has grown. In most of the case, the definitions are coming from the former GHTF group. However, keep in mind that these definitions don't replace the regulatory ones. A regulatory definition always prevails over the one in the standard. In the next part of the presentation, we will be focusing on two major changes: risk management and regulatory requirements. Let's start with the regulatory requirements. We observe a strong reinforcement on the link with regulatory requirements. If we just look at numbers, we are going from less than 15 times the word regulatory requirements in the previous revision to about 50 times in the new revision. If you have already read the standard, you may think that there is nothing surprising and that the precision that were added are common sense. However, one must keep in mind that a certification organization will have to verify the implementation of all provisions linked to these applicable regulatory requirements, section by section. If we look at the requirements directly linked to the QMS structure and implementation, the conformity to applicable regulatory requirements has been added to the conformity of the standard. Indeed, in most cases, the regulation imposes provisions to be fully integrated into the QMS. This is the case, for example, of the approval application phase or the post-market monitoring. The difficulty sometimes encountered is the integration of all the requirements of several regulations in one consistent and applicable quality management system. Also, regulatory requirements can sometimes give very specific information, as for example, document retention periods or certain records. The company management must also meet a number of requirements linked to regulation. For example, the determination of specific quality objectives and appropriate resources. In Chapter 7, Production, we find many references to regulatory requirements, sometimes in unexpected places, such as communication with regulatory authorities in the chapter Customer-Related Processes. However, registration applications are not covered in this section. Throughout this Chapter 7, we can see at various stages of design or manufacturing process the verification of device conformity to the regulatory requirements. The section dedicated to measurement, analysis, and improvement adds specific provisions for post-market monitoring, including vigilance. The new wording emphasizes the provisions preventing the placing on the market of non-compliant with regulations products. A key point to identify is the new explicit objective for internal audits that shall be conducted at planned intervals to determine whether the quality management system complies with applicable regulatory requirements. So now let's talk about the second major modification, the integration of risk management through the standard. The implementation of a risk-based approach is extended to the provisions of the quality management system itself, in various stages of design, product manufacturing, and to the post-market follow-up. Just a quick reminder here, when the standards refer to risk, it is a risk linked to the safety or performance of the medical device or linked to the compliance with applicable regulatory requirements. So here we have focused on two of the main modifications of the standards, but a company will need to go through the detail of the standard during its impact assessment. In order to allow the companies to perform this gap analysis and update its QMS and certification, a transition period has been defined. This transition period is defined in a guidance document published by the ISO organization. The transition period is 3 years for these standards, which correspond to a certification cycle. So the standard is dated March 2016. The transition schedule is defined to ensure that no more certificate under the old version of the standard will be valid after February 28 of 2019. To do so, most certification bodies will observe a period of 2 years during which the certified companies can choose their transition arrangements rather freely. In the 3rd year, however, all initial audits or renewal must be made according to the 2016 revision. And as for LNEG Med, all follow-up audits carried out after October 2018 will take the 2016 version as reference. It is certain that the renewal audit is the easiest transition audit to manage. However, a transition audit can be performed with a surveillance audit or as an additional audit. As the ISO 13485 standard is linked to several different regulations, its evolution has an impact on the conformity to the associated regulatory requirements. Here, for example, Health Canada opinion on CMDCAS program should come soon, and so is the harmonized standards. A working group from the ISO TC20 has already worked on the Annexes ZA, ZB, and ZC, and this now needs to be reviewed by the European Commission. Now, the big question some of you may have is, can we build a system that combines both standards? Today, many companies are compliant with both the ISO 13485-2003 and ISO 9001-2008. If you remember the first section on ISO 9001, the question of the compatibility of 9001 with 2015 with any revision of ISO 1345 comes up pretty fast, especially when your current quality system includes both standards. So first, why doesn't the new ISO 1345 standard follow the HLS structure? First, for timing reasons. The review process of ISO 1345 started before the HLS structure was mandatory. The next revision, however, will be consistent with the HLS structure. Also, among the provision of ISO 9001-2015, there are points that are not in accordance with the spirit and text already in 2003 of the ISO 1345, such as customer satisfaction, the documentary simplification, principle of continuous improvement of the efficiency of the system. Next, the goal of ISO 1345 is to facilitate global alignment of appropriate regulatory requirements for quality management system applicable to organizations involved in one or more stages in the life cycle of a medical device. This was not the first objective in the revision of ISO 9001. Consequently, ISO 1345-2016 keeps the structure of ISO 9001-2008. Nevertheless, work was done to facilitate the joint use of two new revisions of the two standards. The result of this work is in Annex B of ISO 1345-2016. In addition, the analysis that we conducted at LNE confirms this possibility. So the answer is yes, the two standards can be combined. I just would like to draw your attention to an item on documentation. The two standards have features which are contradictory on this topic, both in spirit and in the way the requirements are written. In case of joint application of the two standards, one will need to apply the highest requirement. For example, although it is possible to have no quality manual according to ISO 9001, this requirement is still present in ISO 1345. I hope that this webinar has allowed you to get familiar with the main evolutions of both the ISO 9001 and ISO 1345. Both have a 3-year transition period to allow their implementation at an appropriate pace for each company. Nevertheless, it is important to start now in order, in particular, to ensure the continuity of your certification. Thank you for your attention, and we wish you good luck for the upcoming challenges. If you want to go more in depth on one or both standards evolution, don't hesitate to join us for one of our training sessions. You can find more detail about our trainings on our website, lneamerica.com, or you can just email us at contact@lneamerica.com as written on the slide.